Morning, everybody. We might just give it a couple more minutes before we have people attend. Dan, are you able to?
Yep, testing. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, can't see any video, but.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll just give it another minute, let a few more people join, and kick off some intros. All right, I think we should be all right to kick off here, Hamish, if you're ready.
Yep, let's go for it.
Awesome. Hi, everyone on the call, and welcome to TEG Risks webinar on strategies to enhance machine safety in 2025. My name's Dan Kirkland. I'm not 100% sure if you can see me. My camera is on. I work closely with TEG Risk in the marketing capacity, and my role here today is to support on the tech side of things, should it be required. I'd ask that you all please ensure that you're muted throughout today's discussion. The webinar is scheduled to run for 30 to 45 minutes, and we appreciate that some of you might need to leave slightly early. However, we're planning for a Q&A towards the back end of the discussion, which we expect to start a little after around 11:30 a.m. So for any questions that you may have during the webinar, we ask that you add those as questions in the Q&A bar in the chat here, and we'll be able to get to those in the Q&A section, and any of those that we're unable to get to, we'll follow up after the webinar here today. So introducing our speaker today, we've got Hamish Baker on the call. Hamish is a co-founder of TEG Risk with more than 20 years of expertise in machine safety engineering and safety management more broadly. His experience spans risk management, risk assessment, machine guarding, hazardous substance and explosive areas management, project validation, and more. Having held safety leadership roles in multi-site food and chemical companies worldwide, building a specialist knowledge through advanced training and qualifications, including a Bachelor of Technology with honours, NEBOSH diploma, TUV, SUD, functional safety certification, and hazardous substances and explosive area classifications. Hamish is also the founder of award-winning safety risk assessment software, MinRisk, that optimizes machine risk management systems and puts critical machine safety information in the hands of those that are most impacted by risks associated with machinery. So MinRisk is your all-in-one cloud-based software, and is currently supporting machine safety programs in a range of large manufacturing businesses in both New Zealand and Australia. Now, with those infos out of the way, I'm going to pop myself on mute and hand you over to Hamish. Hamish.
Awesome. I'm just bringing up PowerPoint. So I recognise a lot of the names there. So for those that we've crossed paths before, great to see you here. Thanks for the support. And for others that I haven't met before, you may have dealt with other members of TEG Risk at some point. So also welcome, and to any others that we haven't met, great to see you here, and hopefully we do meet in person again at some point in the future. Full disclosure, this is my first webinar, so I thought I'd put myself out there and I guess try and start sharing some of this stuff. So one of the things I found with trying to put together, I guess, some notes on reflections, trends and insights, I guess, for 2025 is that there was actually a lot that I could put down. So I've had to sort of trim that to fit within our time frames, but I guess it means there's plenty of material for us to do this again, provided it's well enough received. So thanks again. In terms of I guess some of those reflections, when I went through and looked at things, we had all sorts of standards related stuff, and we had a whole lot of technical stuff, and it's pretty hard to squeeze it in. So it might be that some of the more technical aspects we do in a follow-up webinar. So I sort of tried to then, think about a couple of things, particularly maybe at that regulatory level, because I think when you look back over the last sort of 12 months, there's a couple of quite significant things that have occurred. Certainly, I think the directors and officers area at the top level has been really, really interesting. And while not strictly speaking, in 2024, we had the Fakari Management Limited around the directors, being found not guilty, mostly to do with an inadequate investigation, from my reading. But that sort of, felt like potentially the whole directors and officers duties aspects may have been, might become problematic. And then just very recently, it's actually gone the other way with Maritime New Zealand having a successful prosecution for Tony Gibson, who's the ex-CEO of the Ports of Auckland. And there, it was very much a case of, insufficient engagement, and particularly, did there need to be more effective engagement from a health and safety perspective. And then the other one that was sort of, I guess, in the background that sort of got finalised, and it's been there for a while in terms of, I guess, the settlement on forfeiture. And this was really interesting because it's sort of, I never didn't think proceeds of crime, which seemed to be related to drugs, would end up being related to health and safety. We had it with Salter's cartridge there, and just the image there where you see the top of that, a fatality related to explosion of a waste oil handling facility. And there they deemed that those close to the profit, so it's probably related to businesses with small owners, if they're taking a lot of profits, and the more egregious end of health and lack of health and safety management, then potentially those proceeds of crime things come into play. Which so when you think about those sorts of aspects, it feels pretty significant from the health and safety sort of landscape there. And then the other one that I found really, really interesting too, and it's the cases that I think that are defended or are thrown out that are the interesting ones, because they're the ones that sort of almost set the case law. And there was a really interesting one, Glenbrook Farming and Equipment Hire, where the case was effectively defended by virtue of the fact that they couldn't put a causal link between some of the reasonably practicable measures, and this entity had fairly rudimentary, I think they may have even used the word meagre, in some of the case notes, records related to training and maintenance, but they did have them and they were acknowledged, and that particular business there was found not guilty. And there were some issues around how the charge notes were prepared, which contributed to that, but still there is some case notes forming there. Looking back, obviously we had an election last year, and we've got big budgetary constraints.
Safety webinar, but I can't hear them talking. Do you know what I've done wrong?
Can you guys hear? You guys can't hear me?
I can hear you fine, Hamish.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing other people can't from that clip.
Shane, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Hamish.
Okay.
Yep, I can. Shane Fletcher here. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I think well, apologies for those that can't. I'll carry on, and then hopefully it'll be recorded, and you can pick it up and listen to it later on. From a WorkSafe perspective, obviously there's budgetary constraints with the new government. They're doing a whole review of how that's going to run. How's that going to play out? I'll talk about that later. From a standards perspective, anecdotally, we're continuing to see a growing trend of, I guess, identical or near adoption for EN, so that's European normalized or ISO standards. Now the framework's very aligned, so that we're seeing a lot more of that. So I see that as a positive thing, but there's also trade-offs in there. So we sort of see that continuing. Button's not working. And yeah, one of the other things too, I guess, with TEG Risk is, we've got a reasonably sizable team of machine safety experts. So I certainly tried to pull on their reflections as well, to understand, what are they seeing out there, and we tried to sort of pull some of these as far as what we're seeing and all of that sort of stuff. And in terms of, I guess, what we're seeing out there in the workplace from a machine safety perspective, what's the good? Where we see organisations that commit resource to machine safety programs, they get results. Because particularly, with legacy plants, it's not business as usual. There's fairly significant, work required to get there, or to get a good program going. Competency is key. And the type of competency, when I say that, so engineering and systems mindsets we find are really, really important for machine safety. A lot of health and safety practitioners, that may not be their strength. That being said, there are health and safety practitioners who have really good mechanical sort of STEM backgrounds and thinking, and they tend to do really well. But it's something worth considering in terms of who leads some of those programs. Systematic reporting and governance is pretty much the key. In there, we find that when there's really good governance around it, because it ends up being a significant project, staying the course, turning the handle, and making sure the right resources are allocated is really, really, really important. The other thing too is we have noticed, particularly within some of our multi-site, more corporate clients, a lot more tracked key systems, the whole body entry, and we think, and what's interesting is they're being recognised in the latest releases of some AS4024 standards as well. So they're certainly getting a lot more coverage out there in industry, and I think it reflects a recognition of that residual risk of whole body entry, and some of these organisations trying to drive that residual risk lower. So by that trap key, we're talking about, large enclosures where someone can walk right inside it. There might be a blind spot, and just relying on a gate with an interlock is not being something they're prepared to accept. Instead, they go for, an engineering solution which allows someone to take a key in with them, and it prevents that unexpected and unsafe startup. From a combustible dust perspective, we're seeing actually a bit of an uptick in compliance activities around that. So I think that's encouraging from the perspective that I think there's growing awareness around that particular critical risk area. Particularly, New Zealand has a lot of food manufacturing as far as the manufacturing base is concerned. So flour, milk, sugar, anything where you've got handling of any of those sorts of organic powders has got that risk. So that's encouraging that that's happening, because it has been historically very, very weak. So good to see that happening. It is being driven by compliance as opposed to risk management, because only and the compliance aspects are more electrically based, and only 3% of dust explosions are a result of electrical ignition sources. So that's where people are focusing. So I think, the next step there would be for businesses to move to a sort of that risk management process and look at things more closely. But that's probably a topic for another webinar. I think it's a good 30 to 40 minute session in its own right. And then I guess the corollary to, what we've found as those good points is we also see them as, these are the areas where we see, I guess, machinery risk management not going well. And I think one of those is around resources and insufficient resources committed to it. I think it's a more technical and time-consuming process than people realise, and it's probably not the sort of thing that you can do with just business as usual. And if you have an engineering manager who's made responsible for an improvement program and safety is 10% of his job description, 4 hours might get him through the report. It probably doesn't allow for much more. So it's certainly something to be mindful of around the resourcing and how much that's put in there. We're still seeing I guess, a lot of reliance on administrative controls out there. And, you know, we find that there's very much a desire to move to fixed guarding with supported lockout tag out programs as opposed to interlock guards. And I think that's often a result of the residual risk and it being very much a work as done versus work as imagined type stuff, not being fully understood. And perhaps also, you know, it's been a pretty tough economic climate as well. Do we have cost drivers coming in there? I don't know, I'm sort of speculating a little bit there, but we have seen that, and yeah, unfortunately, there's been, you know, accidents happening, you know, because some of that's not that residual risk is not being sort of well managed with some of those administrative controls for a myriad of reasons. And the other thing we're sort of seeing too is, you know, poor implementation of safeguarding solutions. There's many contractors are still insufficiently aware of the requirements of AS92 4024. Many haven't even heard of it before when you talk about it. And that might even flow into internal engineering teams as well. So if they hadn't heard of it before, there's a pretty high likely or a pretty good chance that they're not going to be able to implement it well. But even then, you know, we've had engagement with some of our clients where we've provided scoping and specifications with, you know, photos and textual descriptions and standard specifications for what's required. And even then, you know, the implementation can still be some way off. So it definitely needs to be thought about in the whole process when you go to implement your safeguarding solutions. Think about that and you know, how you can mitigate those aspects, and I'll sort of talk about that later. Just that residual risk thing, it's something that really sort of sticks out, you know, for me, and it's one thing that I'm sort of communicating a little bit at the moment when I'm sort of talking to people. And I think that true understanding of that residual risk aspect and the decisions we make around that is something that we do some work on, and it's something that we try and sort of weave into our training programs. And one of them here is just this sort of photo here where we've got an inclined auger. It's carrying some waste material up it. There's some fixed guards, they're not interlocked over the top, and they're held in place you know, with some fasteners that require a tool to move. So, you know, you could argue, notwithstanding maybe some of the openings on the top, you could argue that these are, you know, it's a compliant fixed guard solution. But, you know, when we sort of step back and we look at a scenario like this, we ask ourselves the question, what's the hazard? It's the rotating auger that can draw you in, and something of this size would probably remove your arm at least. And in this particular instance, the risk is probably, you know, someone, you know, failing to apply suitable lockout tag out provisions and safely isolate the machine before they remove the guards. So that's the residual risk, is someone not applying lockout tag out when they go to remove that fixed guard. And, you know, when you go in and you understand some of the aspects related to a scenario like this, we know that sometimes metal objects can fall into the auger through the waste chute, and people have to run from a different room maybe to stop it, and they have to stop it quickly. And there might be aspects like that. So what happens in that situation? They might be inclined to open it without applying lockout tag out. If you look at the top right-hand corner, you'll see that the isolator is actually out of reach. It's difficult to get to, and you know, it's going to be an increased situation of people not actually getting and applying that lockout tag out. So it's just a sort of a simple scenario, I guess, that I just wanted to sort of demonstrate, you know, to that point that I raised before around people selecting fixed guard solutions with applying lockout tag out and then not fully understanding how effective those admin controls can be, and around that whole work is done with versus work is imagined type aspect. In terms of, I guess, flowing on from some of these 2004 reflections, and these are my own sort of, I guess, thoughts and things like that, and thinking about, the regulator, I do wonder if we're going to get more defended cases. It's sort of been very much the standard MO for people to plead guilty and try and mitigate the cost and the impact associated with sentencing. But I wonder, with a little bit more case law stuff, people might be considering it more closely. I also wonder if we might end up with fewer prosecutions, which may not be a great outcome, particularly if there's reduced budgets at WorkSafe, or there's much more rigorous case preparation required because of some of the recent things there, like Vicario Management Limited, and I think even the hire equipment one, it was how their sort of charge notes were sort of prepared. So, and with the current sort of review they're doing, I'm suspecting there's going to be limited initiatives in the machine safety space that's new. And bottom point there, I think the plant and structures regulations that came out for consultation back in 2019, they still haven't progressed. Nothing's happened there, and from people I've spoken to, it sounds like there's no foreseeable implementation of that. So instead, looking at the manufacturing strategy, they've got some priority plans for subsectors, so food product, metal fabrication, wood product manufacturing. They're certainly targeted for intervention, and it does look quite similar to actually the strategy they had from years ago. So it sounds like it's probably going to be fairly sort of similar program, I think, from WorkSafe as to what we had, back when the Health and Safety at Work Act sort of came out in 2015, 2016. So feels like it will be similar there to me, if I was to guess. What about the workplace and some of the places where you guys will be at? I do wonder if on that due diligence front, you might end up with more engagement from your officers that you have within the business. And certainly there's a bit of water to pass under the bridge in terms of the Tony Gibson case, whether he will appeal what that will result in, and so on and so forth. But I think I'm wondering if there'll be some more engagement there. So there might be more reporting that's required, so that there's additional comfort provided, perhaps. Maybe there will be more funds for health and safety management around critical risks and things like that, to ensure that there is the adequate resourcing and things like that. Don't know, maybe. Coming out of a recession, they talk about that's sort of starting to happen in 2025. Perhaps that's an opportunity. And maybe there might be more external parties that you guys need to be working with if officers are asking for, I guess, additional reassurance or something like that. And I think there may be, I'm speculating here, I thought this might have happened a while ago, actually, when the first prosecutions sort of started happening under the Health and Safety at Work Act and the new high levels of fines came through, but it wasn't always the case. But I do wonder if there might be a general trend towards more engineered solutions with lower residual risk. If officers are concerned about their sort of culpability and where they might sit there might be more funds made available for that. It will introduce complexity. They get more technical. That stage design management process will just be essential. And if there is more of that engineering, safety engineering solutions, the contractor delivery partners and how you do your design management and stage verification will just become really, really essential, so that you get the right solution and you spend your money effectively. And I do think there will continue to be more of that normalization and alignment of standards with Europe, and that'll come with trade-offs. And I think there's more to talk about that maybe in a future webinar. But yeah, there's going to be more of that happening, and there's good stuff and there's bad stuff with that. But yeah, there'll be some stuff there that'll be happening, so it'll be important to get your contracts right. There's a bit of a watch out there on conveyors because that's the standards EN 693 and 4024-3610. Those are the sort of two standards, and they are different. They're not normalised, and we have done some work in beverages where we see some European conveyors coming in. We see conveyors coming in and conforming, nicely to European standards, but they don't to 4024-3610. So, it does create some issues there. So that's another sort of insight from the year. And yeah, going back to, I guess, what's the good and the not so good that we've seen from the various workplaces. Yeah, that governance and just having a plan and staying the course and reporting it is, that's, when I look at the businesses that have done, I guess, machine safety well, that's what they've had in place. And that's been the key plank. Definitely with your risk assessment processes, really important that you get engaged with your staff and really understand that work is done versus, work is imagined. And then if you do that, you've got a better chance of understanding the residual risk that you're with and what, what might be the best solution, for your business, given that. There's been a little bit of stuff through New Zealand Society for Safety Engineering. It was a presentation at a recent New Zealand Institute of Safety Management around standards and the framework for that. And I think that's going to be rolled out further, but there's, understand the framework and really leverage those European standards. They can be really, really helpful. And if your business is going through a guarding remediation program, engage your staff, get them helping, approve your designs and things like that, and then verify in a stage process, so have your contractors turn up with a sketch or a design of what it's going to look like, engage your staff in the review, have someone competent in your team look at it and say, hey, is this going to meet our requirements, both from a usability standpoint, but also from a standard standpoint, because often there's a reliance on contractors and what you get won't conform. So really important to sort of build that into the process. And yeah, one of the things that under the general workplace regulations, under the risk management section, there's a need to monitor your risks. So even if your plants were already in half reasonable state from a machine safety standpoint, there's still a requirement to go through and monitor your risks. Are our site controls still effective? Are they still in place? Are they the right controls? Those sorts of things. I guess one of the things I'd say there is the more people you can get involved in that, the better. You want that army of people looking at safety. And that's one of the things we've tried to set up with MinRisk, as well as it's mobile. It now works on Android, iOS, and Windows. So anybody with a mobile phone could be walking past a machine and they can have a look at it, check out photos and say, hey, it doesn't look like it did, and we had the risk assessment done. Why is that? And photos are great records for monitoring. MinRisk captures that. We talked about the farm equipment hire company with the meager maintenance and training records that were still acknowledged and accepted by the courts there. And the MinRisk has got a training app that puts it out there front and center. It gives you the hazards and the risks on a machine. It gives you residual risks, how to keep yourself safe. And all of this information is URL addressable. You can link it into your maintenance systems to inform maintainers and contractors. So a lot of, I guess, tools there that help with just that constant monitoring. And one of the things that we've introduced this year is actually that MinRisk is read-only. There's read-only licenses available as well, so it's a significantly lower cost. But even if you just want the ability to see what your risks look like, to communicate them, that's an option there. Obviously, there needs to be updates periodically, but there's read-only licenses there just to get that content, with photos and information into your staff and into your sort of army of reps that are champions that are contributing to safety. And I guess, for those that where there is significant remediation works that are required, some businesses are legacy, lots of old plant, lots of residual risk, lots of safeguarding works required. That becomes a big project. MinRisk has got responsible person and target date fields in there, and it produces cloud-based reports, so it's available for everybody. It's easy to update in the field, and all of the data is available for download. And I can see there's a couple of people on the call here that do that really well. They've got really, really significant machine safety improvement programs, and that's something that they do well. And when I talk about having really good governance structures, they're actually the companies I refer to, because I see the way they've set things up, and I see the way that they keep on task, and I see the way that they keep tuning the handle, and they make use of that data. So whether it's MinRisk or anything, use that data and feed it into your governance reporting. It allows people to stay focused and ensure the right things are being done to make our workplaces safer. So and I guess as I sort of said at the beginning, when I was doing reflections and looking forward and strategies and things like that, there was a whole lot more that sort of ended up coming out, and so I've sort of pulled those out. So I've sort of kept it fairly high level, and look, welcome any feedback from people on anything in particular they want us to focus on with webinars going forward. But other than that, that's sort of a 30-minute flyby of our, I guess, reflections and thinking about trends and insights moving into 2025, which, given the proximity to Christmas, is hopefully you found useful. But other than that, I can open it up to Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Hamish. That's super insightful. Everyone on the call there's a little Q&A button or module, if you will, and you can pop your questions in there. One that popped up is around for businesses that might be considered undersourced for committing to safeguarding programs. What are some considerations in 2025 for addressing this and assuring those requirements are being met, particularly when this is a smaller portion, as you mentioned, maybe 3%, maybe 10% of people's roles?
So I think it's really important for people to understand how much risk they're carrying, because it might be that that's a conversation that they need additional resource. And probably the other thing too is for people to sort of step back and the reality of this is machine safety is only one risk plate that people have to spin and keep on top of. You can't do everything at once, and if you're being pragmatic about it, the key thing is to actually just sit down and do a plan as to what you can achieve. And if you go through and you have guarding audits done, or you do your risk assessments and you determine the works that do need to be done, then if you can include some budget costs in there, that at least allows you to chunk things up and say, right, this is how much we've got in front of us, what's our financial resources for this, and how many years is it going to take us? And I think that's one of the things, we have conversations and someone says, oh, thanks for your report. Yeah, we'll have this all knocked over within 6 months. And it's like, this is, more like a, 4 or 5 year project. So, when you look at it. So, understand your risk. Do you need additional resources? That might be the first thing, but then recognize that having a plan and moving through it as best you can.
Great, thank you. I can only see a few questions on the side here. Hamish, can you see any additional ones coming through on your end?
No, I can only see, oh, sorry, you post, yep.
I suppose.
Yeah. I can see one from, we've got a question there from Shane Fletcher. What are the main difference between EN standards and AS standards? So for the most part, a lot of the Australian standards that we see are practically identical adoptions of the European, which is European normalised standards. So wherever you see EN refer to EN, it means European normalised. It means it's a standard that applies all across the European Union, whether it's Germany or Spain or Italy or something like that. There can be deviations, and it's not until you sort of probably get a hold of the standards. But for typical machines like any of the packaging equipment, which might be strappers, it could be wrappers, it might be thermoformers, palletizers, I believe, fairly ubiquitous pieces of equipment that are used widely across New Zealand. I'm pretty sure they were all identical adoptions of the European standards. The ones where I know there are differences is conveyors. That's a key sticking point, and that's something that we've seen come through in a couple of projects that we've been involved in this year. I don't know. Does that answer your question, Shane?
No, not really.
Okay. So do you want to be specifically? So what are the main differences? Yeah.
No, I just after because I haven't looked at the European normalised standards myself. So if there is a difference between the two, what's an example of something that's different?
Right. Yep. So conveyors would be one. Conveyors is the one that sort of sticks out most as to what's different. So the requirement for if you look at the requirement standards for conveyors, much more onerous for Australia and New Zealand standard around your provision of e-stops, for instance. That's one that sort of sticks out and is usually a sticking point, when it comes to compliance, standards compliance. But if you were to compare Australian standards for packaging machines and the European standards for packaging machines, they're pretty much identical. If you're talking about some of the design principle versions, so that's the Part 1000 series, so 4024.1 series, and you compare that against the European equivalent, if there's a difference, it's usually because they're older, the Australian ones. They just haven't kept up with the reviews that Europe's had. So you could argue that the European ones are latest available knowledge, potentially. There's some, you could potentially argue that. So, yeah.
With time for...
But there's a whole training course on that.
With time for another couple of questions here, if anyone wants to pop one in the Q&A section there. One more is, what are the areas in 2025 that you most expect manufacturers to require external support on, and why would that be?
I think, so say the question again, who?
The areas in 2025 that you'd most expect manufacturers to require external support on, that might be different to 2024, 2023, identified some of those trends upcoming for next year. Where do you think the areas that external support would add the most value?
In terms of where I think it would add the most value would probably be, and this is sort of anecdotally from my observations, I think is around really good data and governance reporting. I think so much flows from that if you get that right. And, that sort of ties in with, some of that stuff around directors, officers, due diligence and things like that. I'm also mindful of the fact that, machine safety is only one part of, health and safety that requires management, and, budgets have been cut. People are, while COVID's some way away, people are still pretty tired and scrambling and things like that. So I suspect that maybe just support, irrespective of the topic. I wouldn't be surprised if people are sort of crying out for a little bit of that. But if there was a topic where I think they could get value, it might be around, setting up really good governance programs there.
Great. Thank you. Well, looks like there's no further questions in for now. I think looking there with with a few minutes left, if you're happy to leave that as it is now for Hamish, I think we can wrap this one a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah. So no other questions, team, before we sort of close it off? I mean, certainly any feedback from you guys around, I guess, what you would like to hear in this space. I mean, already there's a bunch of sort of standards related stuff that we can go into in more detail that I'd like to cover off. I was sort of pulling all my notes together for this. There's some stuff around combustible dusts as well. So for those that are handling combustible dust, I think there's a nice little sort of awareness piece there that we can cover off in a webinar. But yeah, certainly welcome any feedback you've got on requests, and we can sort of build that in. And yeah, it might be that we also get some of the other team members from TEG Risk, who are sort of really experts in certain areas to present on certain aspects too.
Great. Thanks very much for your time, Hamish.
Okay. Thanks, team. As always, if you've, reach out, connect on LinkedIn, if you've got any questions like that. Yeah.
Right.
Don't hesitate.
Thank you.
Okay, team. See you later. Oh, Merry Christmas too, by the way. Hope you all have a safe Christmas, team. Catch up with you later on.
Yeah, same to you, Hamish.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Yeah, to all.